You ever get that feeling, despite all the effort you put in, you're just, well, not getting ahead, like you're sprinting on a hamster wheel?
Yeah, that feeling of being stuck.
Exactly. So today, we're tackling a question that's probably crossed a lot of our minds, actually sparked by one of you listening. Could there be a fundamentally different way to structure our economies? How wealth flows.
That's right. And we've got some really compelling material to explore today. Excerpts from Inclusionism, finally, a
Mhm.
system that shares growth and prosperity, plus some other bits explaining its core ideas.
Okay.
And these sources, they aim to do more than just point out the, let's say, current economic pain points.
Mm.
They actually put forward a pretty significant alternative.
Right, a whole different way things could operate.
Precisely. And our aim isn't just to lament the sliver pie. That's a powerful image the book uses, isn't it?
Yeah.
To describe how skewed wealth distribution is getting. And not just here in the U.S., but maybe surprisingly in China, too.
That's a key point. So we want to really dig into the central argument, see its roots and historical patterns, and just get a clearer picture of this proposed new system. And here's a fascinating twist, I think.
Cool.
The book uses AI extensively for data analysis, fact-checking. It's a very modern lens on some, well, very old challenges.
That is interesting, and it makes sense when you look at the author, absolutely, Bruce. His background is incredibly diverse. I mean, military family kid, songwriter, ranch hand, business owner, even experienced homelessness.
Wow, quite a range.
Yeah, and that breadth of experience, it seems like it was a driving force behind his long-term work on this DigiPi system, which then evolved into this people's autonomous economy. He clearly seems to operate from a belief in people's potential, wanting to build a more, well, equitable framework.
Okay, so let's dive in then. Chapter 1. It makes a bold statement right off the bat. The game's rigged, but not forever. The author's basically arguing that the current economic system is inherently skewed. It leads to the situation where most people are, like, competing for a shrinking piece of that sliver pie we mentioned. Scrapping for crumbs, as he puts it.
And it's a crucial point he makes that this feeling, this being stuck, it isn't limited to just one economic group, right?
No,
He
exactly.
even brings in a Biggie Smalls quote, "Mo money, mo problems," to highlight that even folks at the top can feel this relentless pressure from what he calls the beast of capitalism.
Right.
So his perspective seems to be that just accumulating more wealth within the current system, well, it doesn't automatically mean greater well-being for everyone. It's systemic.
Okay, so if the game's rigged, what's the proposed way out? This people's autonomous economy.
Sounds ambitious.
It does.
As we understand it, the fundamental idea is a digital system designed specifically to try and create a more level playing field. Yeah, and if we connect this to maybe a broader economic conversation, the author mentions the McKinsey Quarterly.
Mhm.
He emphasizes this need to shift focus, not just maximizing production, which is often the goal,
Sure.
but also really addressing distribution. How does the value that's generated actually get shared?
Okay, so how does that work in this system?
Well, this is where the concept of CETES comes in.
Yeah.
These are described as digital assets. Individuals can earn them through participating in the economy, specifically by spending within this network.
Ah, okay. So by buying things within this system.
Exactly. And importantly, it's designed from the ground up to avoid speculation.
Hmm.
That's a really key differentiator from a lot of the digital assets we see floating around today.
Right, right. So it's not about buying low, selling high, hoping the market goes up. It's directly tied to actual economic activity, real spending.
Precisely. Tangible activity within this specific ecosystem. And the potential advantages he outlines are pretty wide-ranging for
Oh.
consumers, obviously, but also for businesses. He talks about increased loyalty, purpose-driven profits, that kind of thing. And even for philanthropists, allowing for more immediate impact, maybe incentivizing community betterment directly.
Interesting. So it's pitched as a win-win-win, potentially, for consumers, businesses, and even community initiatives.
That seems to be the vision, yes. A system with benefits for various stakeholders.
Okay, but this prompts a big question, doesn't it? How does this, pretty novel approach square with lessons from history?
Ah, yes. And Chapter 2 dives right into that, actually, with the help of Professor Bob, which is described as an AI agent for historic studies.
An AI historian, okay.
Yeah, and what's really striking is this consistent historical pattern.
Mm.
When wealth disparities get really significant, well, it leads to societal strain, big time.
Okay, let's unpack that. Where does Professor Bob take us first?
We're transported back to 275 AD Rome, We meet Marcus, a carpenter.
Okay.
And even back then, you see the effects of a wealthy elite concentrating resources while the government is devaluing the currency. Sound familiar?
A little bit, yeah.
So everyday people like Marcus are grappling with rising inflation. He's now getting asked to do basic repairs, not the fancier, more intricate work he used to do. It's a clear example of wealth concentration eroding that sort of middle tier.
Huh. Okay, so Rome. Where next?
Then we jump forward quite a bit to the 1730s, Constantinople, Ottoman Empire. We meet Ai-Shi, a silk merchant.
All right.
Here, the issue is more about powerful landowners who are basically neglecting their duties but still extracting maximum wealth from their estates.
So absentee landlords, effectively.
Kind of, yeah. And this imbalance, it weakened the empire from within. It ultimately contributed to things like the Patrona Halil rebellion. So the consequences weren't just economic, they spilled over into social and even military problems.
Got it. Rome, Ottomans, any others?
Yes. Then there's Wu. He's a Ming Dynasty bureaucrat in China, early 1600s. His story really highlights how a powerful landowning class could essentially operate above the law, evading taxes, pushing the burden onto the peasants who were already struggling. The text talks about peasant uprisings, families even being forced to sell their children just to survive. It paints a really stark picture of what happens when that gap between the rich and, well, everyone else becomes a chasm.
Wow. That's grim.
It is. And what's fascinating, or maybe alarming, when you look at these different historical snapshots, these recurring themes just jump out at you.
Like what are the common threads?
Well, you consistently see this concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a small elite.
Okay.
You see a shrinking or hollowing out of the middle class.
Right, like Marcus the Carpenter.
Exactly. Then there's often debasement of currency, financial instability, an increasing disconnect between the elites and the ordinary citizens. They just aren't living in the same reality anymore.
Yeah.
And ultimately, this often leads to some form of systemic disruption or even collapse. It's a pattern that seems to echo across different empires, different times.
It truly is a striking pattern. So where does the book take us after the Ming Dynasty?
We land in Paris, 1788, just before the revolution. We meet Marie Claire, a baker.
Okay, pre-revolution France. We know how that story ends.
Right. And the contrast here is just staggering. The sheer extravagance of the aristocracy versus the absolute destitution of the Third Estate. That famous line, let them eat cake, whether she actually said it or not.
Yeah, it's symbolic.
Exactly. It perfectly captures that profound disconnect. You had the vast majority carrying almost the entire tax burden, while this tiny privileged sliver controlled an enormous share of the nation's wealth.
Unbelievable. And the pattern continues.
It does. Next stop, St. Petersburg, 1905. Nina Petrova, a factory worker.
Tsarist Russia, another powder keg.
Precisely. And her story brings the wealth disparity issue into focus with some hard numbers. The nobility, just 1% of the population, control over 25% of the empire's wealth.
A quarter of the wealth for 1%.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Nina and her family were part of the 90% struggling with next to nothing. It powerfully highlights the extreme imbalance that fueled the Russian Revolution. Events like Bloody Sunday are just a stark reminder of the human cost of that kind of inequality.
It's sobering. And the book draws parallels to today, right?
It does. It brings us right up to the present with Sarah Chen in Seattle, 2022. She works in tech, a supposedly booming industry.
Right.
But she's still burdened by student loan debt. And meanwhile, she's observing the immense, almost unimaginable wealth of the top 1%.
And there are stats to back this up.
Oh, yeah. The book points out that the U.S. top 1% wealth share today is actually higher than the Russian Empire's nobility share was just before its collapse.
Wow. Say that again?
Yeah, the top 1% in the U.S. today holds about 31.9% of the wealth, Russian nobility before the fall, around 25.2%.
Unsettling.
And maybe even more striking. The top 1% in the U.S. holds slightly more wealth, 31.9%, than the entire bottom 90% combined, who hold about 30.6%.
So that sliver pie is incredibly thin for the vast majority.
Extremely thin. And what's also notable is that the book looks at China, too.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. How does it compare?
Well, official data suggests a slightly less extreme concentration right at the very top. Their top 1% holds around 30.6%, similar to the U.S. bottom 90%. But the average wealth of the bottom 90% in China is significantly lower than in the U.S. So even if the percentage held by the top 1% is similar or slightly lower, the concentration at the top feels even more impactful because the base is so much lower for the majority.
So different systems, US and China, but they both end up with this sliver pie dynamic, this extreme concentration.
Exactly. It really underscores that this isn't just about capitalism versus communism or one specific region. It seems to be a recurring danger sign across various economic models throughout history.
But there's a but, isn't there? The author offers some sense of possibility.
Yes, absolutely. Unlike Marcus, Aish, Wu, Marie Claire, or Nina, we have tools they couldn't even dream of,
Like what?
like sophisticated data analytics, artificial intelligence like Professor Bob,
Huh.
global communication networks, instant access to this vast repository of historical knowledge. We can literally see these patterns in real time or close to it.
Okay, so we have diagnostics they lacked.
Precisely. So the question the book raises isn't really whether significant change might be coming here. History strongly suggests that the levels of wealth concentration we're seeing now have historically led to major societal shifts.
Right. It's almost like a historical stress test.
Kind of, yeah. The critical question now is, can we leverage these modern tools, this knowledge, this connectivity, to navigate that transformation in a more informed, maybe more constructive way than societies could in the past?
Can we guide it intelligently instead of just reacting when it breaks?
That seems to be the hope. The author even touches briefly on how this concentration impacts basic needs, like housing, which is maybe a topic for another deep dive.
Definitely. Okay, so let's try and synthesize this a bit as we wrap up. The core takeaway seems pretty powerful. History is just littered with examples of societies reaching a breaking point when wealth gets too concentrated. It leads to instability, sometimes outright collapse.
A clear warning sign.
And the data, as presented here, suggests that major economies today, like the US and China, are at or maybe even beyond some of those historical thresholds.
That's the stark comparison the book makes, yes. But the crucial difference, the potential game changer in our current situation is what you just mentioned, our modern capabilities.
Right. Unlike those historical folks, we can see the patterns in detail. We can model potential solutions, maybe even coordinate change globally in ways they couldn't.
Exactly. And the people's autonomous economy concept, with its focus on creating this self-sustaining cycle of consumption and growth without speculation,
And empowering individuals through these sets.
is presented as one potential pathway forward, an attempt to use new tools to address this age-old problem.
It certainly gives you a lot to think about. Given those historical parallels, does this proposed system offer a genuinely viable way to fix these deep-seated challenges? Or do we need to be looking at other models, other ideas as well?
It forces you to consider the possibilities, doesn't it?
It really does.
And maybe that leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder.
Yeah.
If history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it, often rhymes,
Hmm.
what melodies and harmonies are going to define our economic future?
Mm.
And what role might innovative frameworks, like the one we've discussed today, play in shaping that economic symphony?